My name's Jeff. Welcome to Versus Live.
Why write poetry?
Poem is done. Like, what was the point here? I also don't know where this poem is going.
Poetry's very love-hate.
The worst possible thing is them just saying no.
Hello to everyone. Good
Hello,
morning,
hello.
evening, afternoon, whatever time it is when you're watching this. My name is Jeff.
I'm also Jeff,
Oh,
but most of the times they just call me Matthias for fun.
yes. And again, we're here to discuss all things poetry. Now, I had this huge, great plan about things we were going to discuss today, but then Matthias comes in here and just like
I don't have my headphones, so I can't hear.
But they can, and that's the important thing. They can hear that. And he says he wants to talk about grants again, and I'm like, oh, grants. All right, Matthias.
Yeah, well, okay, so
So you got it. You got a grant. So
But
first of
no,
all,
but we first got we gotta smooth it in. Now you can't just hit them with the news. It has to be like a
spoiler.
But okay, remember that one time a couple weeks ago when we were on here. It was me and Jeff, but our positions were switched.
He was here,
and he was over here, right? And we were talking, and we were talking about grants. We were talking about opportunities, and then that had been when I had first submitted for a grant through the GCAC. And that was actually that was my second time having applied. Like the first time I applied for it was back in 2021, early 2021 when I applied for, like, I guess around this time, right? In 2021, and I had been declined for the grant at that time. One of the things that, and I very distinctly remember kind of around that time period is like there was a lot of frustration and a lot of like, I don't know, angst, maybe, just kind of being like, man, like I can't believe, like it just felt like, it felt like, okay, these people don't believe in me, so like whatever, right? And I think that was it was a really poor mindset. And I remember talking about this a little bit on that episode too, just as far as like I think the mindset around like whether or not I got the grant was poor, especially at that time. But I think the aftermath of that was also whether I get the grant or not, whether the grant is granted, I was still going to be doing the work, just a matter of, how a lot of the work is going to get done. And, 2 years, 200 plus publications, because that grant happened. The initial time was I had never submitted anything for publication before at that time, so it was also kind of an odd situation because it was like I didn't have a single publication under my belt. I only had a couple projects that I did, and they weren't really the most full projects photography wise that I've ever created. Definitely some of them in their like real infant stages of those projects. And so I submitted that thinking like, hey, this should be enough proof of concept to show you that, I'm really ready to do the work. And I actually, thinking back on it retrospectively, not getting that grant was probably the best thing for me. Honestly, because it was one of those things where it's like, okay, I don't ever want to be in the position where people can't see how passionate I am about the work that I'm doing. And I also don't want it to ever seem like, okay, the grant, the money that can come, the opportunity or what have you, like that's the reason for the work. Like I don't want it to seem like that's the reason for the work, and I don't know. I think this experience and then kind of it coming kind of full circle where I applied for the grant this time around and it was granted. And I was really, really excited, man. Thank you so much to GCAC honestly for both sides of it, right? So for being like, hey, you're not quite there yet. You need some time, work in this field. And then for this time around being kind of looking at the work and, granting me the grant. So kind of for both things and I think that if you're an artist out there, if you applied for the grant and you didn't get it this time around, and like you're kind of going through the thought process, take it from somebody who went through, a similar situation, and is kind of on the other side of it now. And there's other sides, in the future, bigger other opportunities that are hopefully going to be coming up here as well. But yeah, I just wanted to say that, opportunities like this are they're things that meet you in the field. You know what I mean? There are things that meet you when you're actually active and you're doing the work, and don't make your projects, don't make these things. And kind of what Jeff was talking about, I don't know why I'm referring to you, I'm talking this kind of what you were talking about. Just when it comes to this kind of stuff is, don't let the grants be the reason that you're doing it. You have to figure out ways to monetize yourself and to take care of yourself and really be able to push your art. Because, in order to keep doing the work, in order to keep creating these projects, you have to also be able to fund the projects, right? You have to be able to, make money so you can take care of yourself. You can kind of, make sure that your time is being paid for, but then also you really want to create. And so the only way to do that is to just to don't be relying on those grants. And I think once that's when that mentality kind of really hit me. I didn't really have a concept of an opposite mentality at the time, but I think that's when that concept really hit me. Like, oh yeah, regardless of what happens, no matter what happens with this grant or without this grant, like I'm gonna be doing photography. I'm gonna be doing these projects. So yeah, man.
I think that's a good point. That like if the project doesn't happen, if you don't get the grant, then I think that's problematic. The grants, you're going to do the project no matter what. The grant's just going to make it easier, and you're not going to have to find another source of income to do it. But even if it doesn't happen, you're still going to do it. Like I think you need to go into projects with that sort of mentality of how you're going to make it work.
Yeah, because and I know you talked a lot about in our first episode when we were talking, or not in the first time we were speaking about this, in that episode you talked a lot about how there's so many artists that pretty much that's like their career path, like it's kind of looking at, or when's the next grant, when's the next thing that's gonna be able to pay for this next window of time. Which, and the thing is, I mean, if the opportunities are available, you know what I'm saying, it's like, and I think we both kind of said on that, the opportunities are available, like, for sure, do what you can to take advantage of those opportunities in those spaces. But yeah, like that shouldn't be the thrust of your goal, like of everything that you're doing. It shouldn't be, oh, let me make sure that this grant goes through so that I can fund this next kind of quarter or what have you. So yeah.
I mean, why would you put your livelihood in someone else's control that you have no influence over? It's like taking agency in your work, and it's hard too, because I think a lot of people don't always know how to handle rejection. And if you're doing art in any sort of professional way, that's probably one of the first lessons you really need to learn is how do you take rejection? Because if you shut down and you just decide, oh well, maybe this isn't for me, or oh well, now I can't do this project or anything like that, well, that's I think that's a good time to kind of reevaluate what priority you put on your work. So I think a lot of people, they apply for these grants and things like that, they don't get it, they get upset, they get angry, they get frustrated.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, because it's also, it's like I there's a lot of really incredibly gifted and talented and driven artists, and driven, that is the operative word here, driven artists in Columbus. People that they wake up thinking about ideas, thinking about projects, thinking about things that they can do in their field, in their artistic field, that'll push the city forward, push people forward, push themselves forward, and things like that. And one of the things that I know about those people is that regardless of a grant or any, like, they're going to be doing this, like they're going to be doing it, you know what I mean? They're going to be figuring out a way, like, how do I, even if it's not the largest, most grandiose version of it, because maybe they don't have the assets on hand to make it the perfect vision, they're going to make it a version of the vision, or whatever version that they can create. And so yeah, if you not getting a grant is the thing that's going to tell you, like, well, hey, now it's time to stop, then, like, yeah, you, just like you said, you got to really kind of evaluate, what are you saying that, because essentially what you're saying in a lot of spaces in that point is, what you create or the projects that you create were only going to be created under the perfect conditions for you to create them, and like under in really easy conditions, right? Because now you're like you're kind of stripping away the doing things in the market in order to push your art and like either sell your art, whatever the situation may be. And you're saying like, hey, unless this injection of money comes in, then you can't really perform and you can't really kind of be out there. So yeah, all the Columbus artists that got the grant, man, congratulations to all of y'all too, man.
Yeah.
I'm like incredibly excited for everything that everybody's going to be doing this year. And I know there's like other grant opportunities and things like that, so definitely be on the lookout for those. But man, I especially all the people that I know specifically that got the grant, I know that they're going to be engaging in some really hefty and purposeful and meaningful work this year using those funds. So thank you, GCAC.
Thanks to them.
Shout out to y'all. Shout out to all the artists.
Yeah.
And shout out to Jeff for this shirt.
This is Eagles.
It's Eagles.
That's all right. We're still here. That's okay. We're still here.
Recount the votes.
It was a hold. I admit. Also, if you're applying for grants in the future, just some things to be mindful of. Deadlines. You want to be, as soon as you really get the opportunity to apply, try to do it, because the later you are in the deadline, those are more difficult decisions for them. I would also say at least how the GCAC works is, every year they have like a pool of money, and it's not like they're giving away that whole pool of money right away. They're spreading it out throughout the year. However, it does shrink as the year goes on. So those earlier grant cycles that I forget when the first one runs, maybe like through February or March, I guess was this the first round or the second round? Do you know? Okay.
I want to say it was the first round.
Okay. First round is in general, that's the one you really want, because the later ones, I mean, they still do have funds, but the pool does get smaller and smaller, so they have to, continue to make
$1 million. Like this one, like I can't remember. It was like 950,000 something thousand. I can't remember from the post, but yeah, there's a lot of artists out there that were, got an adrenaline rush, adrenaline push.
I would also say when you're applying for grants too, don't go too small with what you ask for, because some people are like, oh, this project, I just need $1,000 and that's it, and that's going to cover everything. Very minimal budget, like that's going to cut everything. It might be better to like extend that a little bit, like find ways to do it, because again, like they can always cut back. They may not give you the exact amount that you're asking for, so it's better to go a little bit over budget when you're applying. Just a note.
Yeah. Man, here's a hypothetical, and then we can talk about what you want to talk about, because I definitely do. Here's a hypothetical. So if right now, if you got a grant for, I don't know, let's say $5,000, like what would your thought process as far as the next thing, like where do those funds go to?
If I had a grant for $5,000,
where do those funds go
for poetry specifically?
Yeah, let's go poetry. Yeah, let's go poetry specifically.
I mean, if it was $5,000, I'd probably go pretty heavy on trying to, and I don't remember all the grant specifics and things like that. But let me, for the sake of this exercise, let's imagine I had $5,000 that came my way by grant or whatever, but I had $5,000 for my poetry or my work. I mean, I think, again, I'm big on, I think promotion nowadays is really, really key. So like, for instance, we're doing this podcast, I could literally $5,000, I could hire someone to take these videos and these audio files we made and cut them into all sorts of different styles of content, whether it's short 30-second 1-minute clips, 4-minute clips, things like that. We could bring in some guests, we could do some shows and things like that, but I think most of what I would be doing would probably be promotion related.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you said that, because right behind this curtain, I'm just. What if that was? So listen, we don't have. What is that TV show where they surprise people with the really big checks?
Oh,
I'm gonna say Diagnosis Murder. So we don't have Diagnosis Murder money, but you should share. Like I don't know how the YouTube situation works, but you should share if you're like watching this, or if you're going to be watching this in the future. You should share it. You should like it. Um, and just
These things do
watch the
help, yeah.
entire thing, right?
In the
And
background, yeah. Just have it on
just
back
play the
there, yeah.
entire thing, even in the background. Although we're giving some good information here, and then that way, it kind of helps the channel out, helps things get pushed forward a little bit. Because, like, again, without diagnosis murder money, we just rely on viewers like you at home.
Murder money sounds really bad.
It's diagnosis murder. You took a whole word on. Diagnosis money sounds pretty bad.
But I actually think this argument does kind of tie into the main discussion I wanted to get into today, which was discussing about poet laureates. And what do you imagine if someone tells you they're, I'm poet laureate of the United States of America? What do you think they do?
Honestly, I mean, the thing that I would expect for the United States,
Yep.
Man, it would seem to me like they would be responsible, almost like an ambassador to the art form.
What does that even mean?
To the United States? Which, okay, so, and maybe
I want
in
like
some
tangible,
concrete
yeah.
things.
I want some practical, like
kind
actual
of programs that would really push the art. So, I mean, maybe you would have like national, like a nationwide circuit of kind of like poetry workshops where you would have, all the poet laureates in, every state, be able to, collaborate on, like, maybe specific programming where there could be then, scholarships that would be handed down to like people, like participants in the programming and things like that. Maybe they would, be able to create like networks and things like that in each of those cities, to be able to, really, I don't know, really bolster the poetry communities in those cities. I think probably something that I think off the bat, if somebody was like, okay, tomorrow you're the poet laureate for the United States, I would be like, okay, like one uniform nationwide open mic. That's like not like everybody's on the open mic together at the same time. That's no. But I'm saying, like, in every city that there is a poet laureate, there should be funds and some version of assistance when it comes to like promotion, and like even foundational things when it comes to like being able to find venues and stuff like that, to be able to create an open mic there. That's also like then you can really kind of push an open mic scene in that city, because not every city has like a really bolstering like kind of open mic scene. And I think open mics, even more so than I think showcases and stuff like that, which showcases are important. I think they should come with, showcases in that space as well. But open mics, I think, kind of brings poetry to the everyday citizen in a really tangible and kind of ready-made way, because now you just have people, anybody can walk in and do a poem, anybody can walk in and listen to poetry, and I think immediately it kind of changes the temperature towards poems, because you have, no matter what city you're going to, like if the city has a open mic, like I can, every city there is an open mic. If I'm there when I say open mic, I mean like weekly open mic. I mean something that is very consistently happening every single week. The person or the personnel that is running the open mic, they're paid a wage and a salary that they can live off of, so that like their entire energies can be focused towards really building up this open mic in their city. And then, I mean, you can even have like an entire circuit that's solely based on this city's open mic, or on this national kind of open mic kind of circuit, where now you have like maybe you choose like a different city every year to be like, this is like the national poetry slam, right? And now you have everybody from all these cities that maybe wins whatever circuit of slams, and everybody has the same kind of rules and like kind of regimented kind of rules when it comes to around this slam that gets you into this space. And then maybe you have these really large events, because I think the thing that would do is now you are, I mean, and I would say maybe have one of the things when it comes to like support for that venue would be kind of like recording materials and staff that's able to record and do some real content creation around like maybe not every single poem, but just kind of getting a temperament for each city, and in that way you can kind of like, oh yeah, I get a flavor of what this city's open mics scene is like. Yeah, that's just off the cuff,
Okay.
right? I haven't put a lot of thought into that.
Yeah.
What about you?
Seems like you're putting a lot of emphasis, especially on again like open mics specifically.
Yeah, well, to me, open mics are kind of like the soil that things grow from. So there's a ton of other things that can really happen when it comes to workshops, when it comes to again, showcases, book clubs, even. There's a lot of other things that I think kind of sprout out of that, but I think the most potent delivery, like when we're talking about people getting poetry and just being able to consume poetry kind of immediately, is going to be the open mic, and then that's going to lead you to everything else. Like you're going to be able to build off of that. But I think if you start with that, then people will start putting the other assets together.
So it seems like you're especially targeting people who are already writing. Do you think that's fair?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think that you can. I think doing something like that would bring out a lot of new writers, because I think one of the kind of common stereotypes, which is maybe it's not a stereotype because it's probably kind of true, when it comes to like poetry, is that it doesn't really make a lot of money, right? In a lot of ways, and so kind of having a national agenda when it comes to poetry, and really just like kind of creatives in that way, I think would kind of spur a lot of people that were like, well, I'm not gonna put a whole bunch of my time and energy into writing or anything like that, but oh, wait a minute, there's this thing that connects every city that has, because again, it wouldn't be every single city, but every city that has a poet laureate, that kind of connects all these places together and kind of creates this semi unity, but also it's just you can kind of listen and look at okay, maybe I'm not in Raleigh or Durham, or like I'm not in Dayton or San Francisco, but they have these open mics that I know maybe there's like a website that I can kind of check in, like let me listen to some poems from in those cities, like that would be cool, you know what I mean?
Just quick note too, Sabrina stops by. What's up, Sabrina? Good to see you.
What up, Sabrina? Yeah.
Sabrina would push for a national TV poetry show. Competitions for singing, dancing, one for spoken word.
Nice.
Kind of similar veins to the open mic promotion, things like that.
You ever notice that it's when so I think that, and I don't even say, I think that if somebody had a show that was like comprised of just singers, everybody's like fine with it just being singers. Same thing with rap shows, same thing, but it's only like poetry shows that they're like, oh, poetry, but you could also be like,
but with singing or dancing,
which is not, there's nothing wrong with it, but I'm like, this, it's interesting because it's like, it's like poetry, but it's like, oh yeah, but if you guys got a song on your heart, sing it.
I mean, it's the same thing. I don't know if anyone here watches Two Set Violin, which is a different YouTube channel. But one of the things that they mention a lot is, I mean, they're focusing on classical music, but I think they highlight some things. Because when you see classical music used in things like America's Got Talent and stuff like that, what always happens if someone starts off with classical music? They immediately
hit like hip hop or something.
They change it. Like they'll start like slow with the classical piece. And then, like a quarter of the way through, suddenly will change. Like the beat will drop, or like the lights will change. They'll strip on stage, or like things like that. It's like, what is that? So I think
it's like the juxtaposition is like nobody's ever thinking, oh, I can play Mozart. Nobody knows that I can break dance.
Yeah. Or like I think it's this idea that I think we also kind of see with poetry, that it's not enough, that it's boring, or that it's overly sophisticated. Like I think there are a lot of stereotypes regarding poetry that hurt its mass appeal.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because it's also like people view. I think a lot of people view poetry as a base component to those other arts or to a lot of other arts. And so like when they look, I think a lot of times you look at poetry and they're like, okay, rappers are poets, but they do it so, but they're like poets, but they're these other things too.
Mm-hmm.
Singers are poets, but they're these other
Mm-hmm.
things that are on top of poetry. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? So like a lot of people kind of regard like poetry as like
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of like the starter level. That's where, and you can be an amazing poet, you can be an amazing, crazy, great poet, but you're not a rapper though. You know what I'm saying? Like that's like this when you graduated from
Mm-hmm.
poetry, or a lot of people regard that as like, you know, the next level of poetry, which these are not opinions that this show shares, but it's just to say that there's a lot of people that do feel that way.
Or
And
just, I was gonna say, there's also people that is like, oh, you tell people that, oh, like I do poetry, or you ask them like, hey, do you do poetry? And like, oh no, like poetry is too complicated, or like it's too complex, or like, oh, I can never do, or they think Shakespeare, and it's
they
like,
let me do it.
it's like, so there's a lot of perceptions about poetry. Like, it's, have you ever heard of like an affective filter before? It's a language learning term, but it's basically the affective filter is like this idea of like, um, the lower your affective filter is, the easier it is for you to learn something. So like if you get nervous, or like if something's made super difficult, these are all things that raise the affective filter, which make it harder to learn something. So it's like when people, if you just pull someone off the street and you mention poetry to them, they like the effective just like jumps up so high. It's just like, oh, poetry, these preconceived notions just make it
Yeah.
so difficult to get into. So the barrier to entry is really, really, or it's assumed to be high, which makes it high.
Yeah, which is again another reason why it's like I think, I mean, not a lot of people know a lot about open mics. You know that, and that's one of the things. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, one of the things, especially as somebody, and we've both like ran open mics in this city before, and one of the things that when it comes to like new people is that like they just never knew this was here. They never knew, you know, there were things like this. That's like a good amount of new people, and so you know, just kind of getting people familiar and getting people to know like if if you're in a city that has like an open mic, like you, or that has a poet laureate, then you have a weekly accessible open mic. And I mean, I think if you can bear it, if you're like, there's one solid one that this is the one that's the national brand, but if you can bear it, if your organizers can do it, they should be working on being able to make more nights available, or more nights of programming available. But yeah, it's just that I think that, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that a lot of people, they don't really have the way that they think about poems, or the way they think about poetry. I think it's also interconnected with the way they see poetry being performed, because it can be really daunting if you're watching somebody perform a poem and you're like, I can't do that. And so you're interlocking performing and writing. You know what I mean? And I think if you do that, then I mean, I think a lot of people do that to the detriment of the writing, right? So because a lot of people, they're like, oh, I just want to perform, and so they're not really thinking about the writing part of that as a separate entity that you need to, you should be trying to write good poems. And then on the other side of that, a lot of people are like, oh, these performances are too dynamic that I can't ever see myself doing that, so I don't see myself getting into the writing part.
So I guess like if I were a poet laureate, like I certainly understand the appeal for like, you know, the poetry shows and things like that. I think that makes sense. I feel like my goal would be trying to get people to interact with reading poetry and encountering poetry, and then I think one thing would lead to another, and that would lead to writing it. But I think just having people more exposed to like the written form of poetry, I think would be really helpful, because I think a lot of times, again, you say poet, first person, people think of immediately Shakespeare a lot, or things like that. So I think trying to get people to kind of see what's going on in contemporary poetry, whether it's, you know, it'd be cool to like in every city as a poet laureate, um, like for instance, your mass transit, like having ads, or like ads, quote unquote, but like for instance, like every bus like having like just a little like thing where they put I forget what those are called, but like overhead, like those little overhead paper ads, like having it be a poem. Like put one on every single bus or put one on every single subway. You know what I mean? You don't even have to put it throughout the bus, just like one. But I think trying to work with transit agencies to do something like that. I think, in every city, maybe every major city trying to get like one or two murals putting up that have lines to a poem. I think just trying to make. I think whenever you're learning something, the mind is very lazy. The mind doesn't really want to work. It does everything it can to not work. So if our goal is to try to get the mind to interact with poetry, trying to make it so hard to not be exposed to poetry, so like if we just put the poems in as many places as possible, you have to be exposed to it. So I feel like those would be kind of the things that I would be interested in trying to push.
But also, it's like, if you're trying to learn a language, the best thing that you can do for yourself is kind of put yourself in a situation or in a space where the language is kind of inescapable.
Right.
And I mean that's how we learn our language
100%.
growing up. We're always around people that speak our language, and then you're always able to watch. There's so much comes from you being able to watch somebody's mouth while they're speaking. So like when you're a kid and you're learning new words, or you're learning even how to pronounce words in general, a lot of that comes from you being able to see people's mouths as people are pronouncing it. And so so it's just to say, like, exactly what you're saying as far as being kind of inundated with stuff on the transit. You might go into like restaurants and there might be ways that's presented there, or any number of ways where the poetry is so easily accessible because it is maybe kind of a default in a lot of those spaces. I think would really kind of help the presentation.
So that's even things like talk to your radio stations and then like saying like, hey, once in the morning or something like that, just reading a short poem, like talking to DJs, like this little stuff like that. I mean, you throw things everywhere.
Here's a little poem called "The Winds of the Waterfall,"
or putting in like ad spots and stuff like that. These are as many places as possible. Some are going to work better than others, but it's just that idea of just constant exposure.
Yeah. I think it'll kind of get people a little bit warmed up to maybe kind of exploring some spaces outside of what their typical exposures are. And I mean, again, when we're talking about open mics, I think you got open mics that kind of lead you into some of like the other shows and maybe some of the local poets that are like really, really good that you just never would have ran across if not for the fact that, hey, well, wait a minute, I didn't even know this happened in my city, that this thing occurred in my city. And so, that'd be good.
So I just kind of want to run through what I don't want to use. Okay, so the current poet laureate again is Ada Limòn. Who don't know, now you know. Okay. The poet laureate before that was Joy Harjo, who serves 3 terms, which is, it's not a record, but it's slightly unusual. It's kind of long. But she also, I don't want to look at. I mean, we'll kind of mention her a little bit, but I don't want to focus too much on her because she was operating during the pandemic. Which kind of, not the best situation. So who was poet laureate before that? Well, we had Tracy K Smith. So I kind of just want to like highlight some things that she did and kind of just want to get your thoughts. Impressed or just pressed or unimpressed, however you kind of just kind of feeling about what she did. I'll make this big. You can see on my screen with fast. So the big thing that she was doing was she was interested in going to rural communities and doing some things related to poetry there. Okay, so she went to specifically her first term. You can see she went to 3 main places: New Mexico, South Carolina, and Kentucky. By the way, this is all from, what's the website here? Library of Congress research guys, who I imagine is pretty reliable, but regardless. Okay. She also gave some talks and things like that, but this was her big project. Her big project was going to New Mexico, South Carolina, and Kentucky. Unfortunately, several of these sites are blocked by paywalls, of course, so I don't have full access to them. But and then also note during her second term, she made an anthology which consisted of 50 poems for our time. I can't imagine trying to make narrow down to 50 poems alone. Other things she did during her second term, she started a podcast. I don't is they say it's a weekday podcast, but I don't know if this so it's called the Slowdown. I've not heard this, I'll be honest. So if you guys have heard of the Slowdown or if you listen to it, let us know what your thoughts were on it. I don't know if it was every day and things like that. I don't know how often. The episodes were short, 5 minutes. And after that, she did a reading in the Coolidge Auditorium. And then basically had different poets, and then they had a discussion. Okay. So just kind of based off of what we've heard about here. I know we don't go too into details on what exactly happened in New Mexico, South Carolina, and Kentucky. Those 3 places that she chose for her pilot project in rural communities. Thoughts on that, though?
Yeah. I mean, without kind of knowing what happened there,
I'll dig some research into it.
Okay. I think that's a good. At the very least, I can attribute from what I'm hearing from it. It seems like fairly good intentions. Mm-hmm. I think that especially when you're dealing with people that don't maybe have a ton of exposure to your work, or maybe their day to day isn't really in court. Like they're not driving past your open mics, or they're not kind of in the city where a lot of the poetry community might be, kind of being able to bring it to them, I think is always a good thing. So it's just again, I don't know what the work was.
Got you.
You know what I mean? But
got you. I mean, just been good. I'll show this. This is from U.S. News and World Report. We can kind of see what she did. Give me a moment. So some things that they specifically mentioned. So this is for her trip to New Mexico.
Yeah.
Specifically, but I imagine for the other places, kind of similar ideas. So she made some stops in Native American communities, kind of prescient before Joy Harjo became Laureate. She's lost the shore because she wants to show people can see other perspectives. Okay, so she's done readings beyond Washington, D.C. Okay. She visited Air Force Base. Okay. On Friday afternoon, she visited the Santa Fe Indian School. She learned about their cultures and classes. These are just kind of student recollections of what happened.
Can you go back up one time?
She heard some poems from some students. This is Jarvis Harvest. Shared his poem Mountain in the Sky.
Does it mention anything that was kind of done there to push the poetry community there when she left? Because that's the thing I think I would be interested in. I'd be interested in being like, okay, I want to, maybe if I'm starting something, I don't want to, I'm not a poet laureate, so I don't know, but I'm like, I'd be interested in that.
Unless there's something I missed, I did not see anything like kind of like a lasting kind of impact kind of thing.
They have a way to be able to, because I'm sure for all those students and for everybody involved, that was part of those events. Maybe not everybody. I want to speak for you guys, for them. But yeah, I would be confident that that was a really impactful space for them. And especially if you're able to see her perform and you were able to perform in front of her, that was a really impactful space. And I would just be interested in knowing kind of what fruit came from that. And maybe if you were personally invested in providing some of the foundation for that fruit to come up.
I think it's a great question. I think it also kind of speaks to part of the problem with being a poet laureate as well. I mean, we spoke with Jay Ward
We did.
what was that, like a month or two ago? Who he's the poet laureate of, God, I forget now. It's not. Is it Raleigh? Is it the whole? It was his whole state. I forget. He's a poet laureate in North Carolina. Jay, I'm sorry if I forget your exact title and position. Or Durham.
Was it?
He's a poet laureate of a city, I believe.
Yes.
And I think, the nice thing about being a poet laureate is it sounds like it's very, very flexible in terms of, hey, whatever you want to do, you kind of seem like poetry related, go for it.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, that same flexibility can also lead to personally what I view as underwhelming results. Honestly, I mean, and that's because there's some poet laureates. I forget. I think if anyone here listens to Poetry Off the Shelf, which is a poetry podcast, they had an episode. I mean, it would be dated now. It's probably like 3 or 4 years old now. They did an episode talking about poet laureates. So one of the things they mentioned is, I mean, there have been poet laureates that literally did nothing. It's like they were given the title and just literally just stayed out of the public eye and things like that. And to me, it just feels like it's a position, it's a title, it's a prestigious title.
Yeah.
If you're a poet and you're named, Poet Laureate of the United States of America, I mean, it's a big deal. And to then take that sort of mantle and not have anything, I don't want to say not have anything to show for it, but like not have anything lasting, that like when you're gone, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later, and there's nothing that anyone can point to, about during your tenure. I mean, it's.
Although I think I would be maybe kind of worrisome about being a poet laureate for the United States, because it's like, art a lot in a lot of ways, not empirically, but like to a degree for a lot of people, and not even for. It can be political, and it can be intensely political, and it can be for a lot of people the exact method that they use to push, their politics. And so I think that, I think I'm always kind of wary of like, man, like the people that I'm fighting against, they're also the people that are like giving me the position, and they're the ones who are supporting me. Like, what does that say? Or like, what does that really say about the mission or whatever your mission is? And so maybe I might be a little bit worrisome about that. But yeah, just to say that if we're just talking about on a strictly just poetry basis, I think one of the things that that happens a lot is that people don't really set expectations for themselves or for what things should be, especially in the art field, because they're like, as long as you're creating and you're open, like, they're not really worried about like, okay, any kind of hard metric about like around your success or what you would deem as success. But it's also because as soon as you do that, then you have your metrics for failure too. You know what I mean? Now if you directly say this is what success means in this position, then the thing that you're also saying is that this is short of these things is where failure is. And so,
and you think that's a negative?
No, I think it's positive. I highly endorse that the attitude of knowing what your parameters are, and then now that you know what your parameters are, you can work towards it. Because I'm like, it's going to be a rare person that's given zero parameters around their success and still succeed, because you don't even know what succeeding is. Like, God, you have no idea what succeeding is if you're just like, I'm just going to do things. And so like, maybe you could have, I mean, I don't know if you made it into like any kind of fiscal metric, like, let's say your company made $100,000 over the past, I don't know, 3 years, which is, there's a lot of people out there. It's like, oh, that's a lot of money for your business. Okay. So, so whoever I feel like that, like people run into a lot, like, that's not, they try to figure out, okay, business, they want to make this much. I'm like, okay, listen, take baby steps. But yeah, so like, let's say 3 years, $100,000. But let's say if you actually had some parameters and you actually had some metrics for your success, and you actually had you had to really activate yourself along those lines. Let's say you could have made $3 million, like as opposed to just like it's small things like that that I think if you have a very directly communicated goal, that it's going to be frustrating to fail if you do fail, but you don't even know that you failed in the other way.
Yeah. I just think that I don't know. Like I was just doing a lot of research, just kind of reading what people have done during their tenure. When they had that position, and these are big name people. Like again, like Tracy K Smith, that's a big name. Joy Harjo, big name. Like,
yeah.
And then I mean, a lot of them are making like collections. Like I know Joy Harjo, she put together a collection with a lot of different like Native American voices, in anthologies and things. I guess trying to decide what the goal is, and I think the biggest goal, in my opinion, based on just what the title is, a poet laureate, you're an ambassador of poetry. Your goal is to, in my opinion, like spread poetry as far and wide as possible.
Do you think it might even be better? This is a good experiment. Do you think it might be better for a poet, somebody that is like a poet laureate, to be somebody who is maybe not even a poet? Maybe the person is like they're in business and their entire goal and outlook is how to grow and expand. So like their entire outlook on art is growth and expansion, and I think, and this is kind of where when we're talking about maybe people's different people's strengths and weaknesses and things like that, because I think I absolutely believe that there are absolutely creatives that are incredible genius business minds, you know what I'm saying, but it's not a ton, right? It's not super often you're going to find somebody who is composing symphonies and who is writing these incredible amazing books and poems and stuff like that is also somebody who can spearhead a Fortune 500 company. Like those two things don't intersect incredibly often, if at all, right? And maybe the person that is running the Fortune 500 company, maybe this person understands taking something that's small and expanding it out to like scaling it. And then maybe the creatives are the people that are better at on the ground actually understanding the culture, understanding, okay, this is the structure that this person has provided. Let me kind of creatively innovate ways that the structure can really blossom and become something great, and individualistic for like our city or our state or what have you. So yeah, I wonder, like, what do you think about that? Do you think that that might be a better arrangement?
It all depends on what the goal is, right? I think a lot of people they think business and things like that, and they get an icky feeling, like or like things like that, and especially when it comes into art. And I think a lot of people put art on like a pedestal, and like they hear like I'm a creative, I as like, and they treat being creative like this really special thing that only other creative people that only creative people are going to understand. But I don't no, I mean, I think as I think everyone has a degree of creativity in them. I don't think it's unique just to one subset. And I think a lot of times we make art feel like this very mystical kind of experience, whereas I think it's just a natural compulsion that I think people have. People want to create. And I think there's lots of things that are related to business that can also work very well in art. To go back to your question, there's parts of it I like. Part of me kind of wonders is maybe we need a second position, because I think poet laureate itself, I think just based on kind of that national prestige, or I don't know what the right word is, but in like just the tradition, I feel like probably needs. I think it works best when you have like an established poet, just based on how it's been set up currently. But I definitely wouldn't be opposed to like having a secondary position being created that's like specifically focused on no, our job is the growth of poetry or exposure to poetry.
Yeah, because I think that actually I want to kind of circle back around to the initial point that you make when you talked about like everybody wants to create. I don't know about that, and
Okay.
and the reason why I don't know about that, and I think we're creatives, right? So it like we are people that
Maybe I'm just very biased. Yeah.
It's just like
just
everybody
living in a bubble. Yeah.
it's just
Okay.
like, yeah, I
Maybe.
doubt it. But
Maybe.
yeah, no, but like we are poets, and it just so happens a lot of our friendship circles are also creatives, right? And that's made evident by the things that you know what I'm saying. Like so, like I do photography as well. I do like poems. I write comedy stories, like whatever it is that I can do. I create whatever, and I think that's a fair. It's a fair point to make, maybe about like people that would maybe be like us in our circle, and like there's people on other ends of on the same end but in an extreme that are like they're creating things all the time that are they're bringing things into. So it's I think I think that's absolutely true about a lot of people, but I think that there's a lot of people that are like I'm more than happy. I don't have to create things, you know what I'm saying? Like I don't want they don't have any particular urge to write a poem or to write a story or anything like that. Maybe they enjoy intaking the content. I might even make the argument that they are the people that get the most joy out of it, because there's so much polarity between their personality subset and what is happening that their enjoyment of it is like it's kind of like if I make burgers for a living and like I'm always like around burgers or eating burgers or something like that, like a person who's like I haven't had a burger in 10 years, and you bite into this thing, you're like, oh my god, this is amazing. As opposed to me, maybe I can appreciate I can tell you all the spices and things like that that are kind of comprising this thing, or in the exact cut of the meat and all this other stuff. But it's like, yeah, I'm not not the best. I'm not getting the most enjoyment out of this, whereas they might be. But yeah, I think there's absolutely people that are really not invested in creating and adding on to something, which is kind of what a lot of creators are doing. And a lot of people are like, they're just interested. They have the minds to be able to maintain it, which I don't think a lot of creators have. A lot of creatives are people that they have an idea and they have the focus and drive to bring that idea to life, and maybe they can do it the one time, which is the reason why they create it, and then now they're on to the next thing. Now they're trying to build this other thing, and now I'm not saying it's necessarily boredom as much as it is. It's like the interest has shifted to something else. And then there's a lot of people that if you told them for the next 10 years all you're focusing on is this, don't add, like I'm not asking you to add to it or build it or anything like that, I'm asking you to maintain it exactly like that, they would be incredibly content in exactly that. Which kind of to go to our second point, just when we're talking about how people kind of interact with art and how people kind of interact with the potential, I think, growth model that we should have when it comes to like kind of growing art in your city. And maybe should is the wrong word, because I think a lot of when we're talking about creativity, we're also talking about a mostly organic structure that's happening. People like poems, and so people in your city go to get more poems. But if you don't have a apparatus to maintain that, which is a lot of times that's where those business minded people come in, where they're like, well, we you did this exact kind of show, and when you did that show, that's like a lot of times that's the reason why I'm like you have like an agent, right? So you have an agent who's able to tell you, okay, well, you know, typically agents aren't stepping in to make the success happen. They're stepping in because the success has become unmanageable by you. But a lot of times it's like it's not manageable because the creatives are like, I'm not a person that can orient, schedules and try to organize, where I'm supposed to go here and how much to charge this. Like maybe I am not a person that can even try to figure out, okay, I'm performing here for how long, this is how much I should. Maybe they're not that kind of person, but maybe there's somebody that's like, I can just input numbers, I am that person for you. And that's a good collaborative, I think, team, because now you have somebody who is the fuel, and now you have somebody who's the car. Like if you put this fuel into me, I'm gonna reliably get you every, you know what I'm saying? I'm gonna reliably get you the results that are desired out of this space and kind of get us to where we need to go. So yeah, I mean, second position, I mean, yes, because it's kind of like like a CEO and a CFO kind of position almost. Like you have this kind of creative, almost like pushing your space, like this is the new thing that we should do, this is the new thing that we should do. Then you have this other person that's like, well, hold on, this is not sustainable in this market. Like the kind of this kind of show, we tried it 3 times, all 3 times it bombed. Maybe this isn't the time for us to be doing this, or maybe we should be pivoting to something else that works and something else that is more profitable and manageable, that actually has some growth in the future.
Yeah. And whether it's like a position that's like even connected with the poet laureates, like the poet laureate gets chosen and then they get to pick their own kind of person help them, or it's like a separate thing entirely and without collaboration.
Yeah. And this is kind of like, we're like a hypothetical, right? But so the only thing that I would say about that is I think that creatives, I think it creates a dynamic where one is more important than the other, or like to be in actuality, it's like, yes, I'm not necessarily more important as much as the thing that's the most apparently profitable, and it's immediate, right? Because people aren't coming to see, the person that organizes the show and the setup and everything. They're not coming to see you, they're coming to see the artist, right? But I think that dynamic could be helped by really accentuating the value of the person that has the responsibility of really and truly setting the foundation for this art and setting the foundation for this growth. Because I mean, I think it's a very oftentimes it's kind of undercut how incredibly important that is. And the more that is done, and the more people kind of don't really recognize how important that is, I think the more that you'll kind of have events like there's probably plenty of shows like open mics, or even like showcase type shows. There's plenty of kind of orgs that, if they had more people built in that were, listen, y'all are all super creative, this is great, you guys are coming up with really great, amazing ideas, but let's kind of cut, as opposed to putting all this money towards this thing, let's kind of scale down this idea, save this money, put it towards maybe the thing that we know works. And like do small things like that I think creatives don't do super inherently. A lot of times there's always in between, right? There's always people typically have a degree of organizational skills, and then there's some people that have it more than others. But if there was just somebody that was like, and it'll also free you up too, right? So it's just like, just get out there and dream as big and as wide as you possibly can. Just know that that dream's going to be filtered through an accountant who's going to be like, whoa, that's a $1 million dream. If we can get that to 250,000
Mhm.
and save the rest and kind of build upon this
Yeah.
and build these, like, we'd be great.
It's also liberating too, because you then allow the person who's coming up with the ideas to kind of focus more,
Yeah.
which then allows them to spend more of that energy on those specific things.
Yeah,
You know,
because I mean, how much more would you say that you would be able to accomplish if all the things that took you away from your craft, as far as, you know, as far as the work to build up
I
the
mean,
like editing videos, let's say
mhm.
editing videos, and if people could just if they just like editing videos and navigating YouTube, so the only thing that you had to do was sit here, record, and then you
Yeah, I mean,
walked
it's.
away.
I mean,
maybe
I mean, you're talking like
Scrolling.
exponential, like things you could handle. I mean, even
Huge.
just from like a writing perspective, it's like if you're a writer who's trying to get work out into the world, you, writing a poem, takes a certain amount of time, but so does sending out those submissions and things like that. So it's
Yeah.
like if you have someone that their whole job is just to submit work for you, you pay them, you have them work for you a couple hours a month, you pay them by the hour. That's it's not a bad investment.
Not a bad one at all.
If you're taking your work seriously, you're trying to get a couple hundred submissions out a year. Um, it's not a bad investment. You know,
Yeah. Get a personal assistant, guys. Just do
yeah,
whatever money you have. Just give
yeah.
it to somebody and just say, just hand them all your papers and just say, just do things with this, and then walk away. And then in 6 months, you'll be famous.
Yeah. I think a lot of times when it comes to art, people are afraid to make investments in their art, especially if they're afraid of handling those sorts of logistical types of things. Like a lot of people are kind of trying to do everything themselves.
When do you think that it's a good idea to start making that degree of investment?
I think once you have to determine how serious you are about what you're doing, if you're taking it seriously, I mean, again, from a submission standpoint and things like that, like, how many submissions are you trying to do? If it ends up that the amount of time you're doing submissions is greater than the amount of time that you're actually doing the writing, I mean, that's probably a sign that something's not working.
Yeah. And that's and kind of what you're saying there, like that's another reason why it's like it's worth it to be really precise about all these metrics. Like, don't just be it's not just,
Mm-hmm.
man, I want to do as much as I can. Like, no, tell me.
Yeah.
So what are the amount of submissions that in between, what is today's date, the 21st of March and the 31st of December, how many submissions would you have liked to have done at that point? What would you consider a success and what would you consider a failure? Okay, so now that we have that down, how many hours in the day can you personally commit to this? How many hours in a day can you personally commit to, and factor in rest, factor all those things in, but get so precise that now you can actually start playing with the variables. You can actually
100%.
start shifting things around.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of people are like, oh, but it's too expensive to do that. It might be too expensive not to, because these things take time. So it's like, and as you get, if you're young and a writer, like you're in your 20s and things like that, your greatest resource is your time. But as you get older, time is your most valuable resource. So you don't have an infinite amount of time, and if it's taking you all those hours and you're just doing that thinking that, oh, I'm saving myself money because I'm doing it myself, well, it's like, well, you also are taking that time away that could have been time you spent on your craft and on your work. Everything has a cost. Being cheap has a cost. These are things that we kind of need to kind of start considering.
But one thing I have a theory about, and I think one of the things I see this in is, I see it in myself a lot, especially when I was younger, when I was like in my early 20s, is once you make that investment, it's kind of like you're locked in now, right? So it's like the money thing is like, man, I don't want to spend this money, but it's like, if I spend this money and I don't push on my end, then it was a waste. And yeah, I think it's all like that. That's a really good test and a really good barometer for, just like you said, how seriously are you taking this? Because if you are, I don't know, let's say, for example, I mean, if it's easier, let's say like in photography, right? Like in photography, if I go out and I buy the $5,000 camera, which I would say if you're just now starting, like, don't do that. But it depends on how much money you got. Who the heck knows, right? But I'm like, if money's kind of tight and you're like, man, I need to get into photography. Let's say you get out there and buy. You're like, I'm gonna buy the $5,000 camera. But say you buy it because you're thinking to yourself, I cannot buy this and not work, right? Like in order, and that might be a good thing. I think it's a really good. It might be a good motivator to be like, well, listen, am I a person who am I saying that I don't plan on making this money back with this? Because if you make that kind of investment, you're either telling yourself that you just got $5,000 to blow, and if that's not what you're telling yourself, then you're telling yourself the other thing. You're telling yourself, I'm gonna work, I'm gonna make this money back, and I'm gonna be able to reinvest even more so into myself in the future. But it starts with me making this huge, really big investment now. And that's what an investment is. It's saying, well, hey, I'm gonna do this right now. I'm gonna understand. I'm gonna be in the hole, because if the investment got you something tangible that made everything worth it in the first place, then it wouldn't be an investment, because it would just be a purchase, right? But an investment is something that where you're like, okay, the thing that makes this worth it is the effort and the time that I'm putting in, whatever it is that I'm putting in, or the effort and time that maybe other people are putting in that pushes this thing forward. So, yeah.
I think another thing you kind of ask yourself too, especially if you already have a job, but maybe you have a family. Like for me right now, I have not submitted a ton of work this year, but also like submissions aren't my goal right now, specifically. But if that is something your goal, like you can probably, if you have a relatively stable job, do you have $20 lying around at the end of the month? Because that $20, you could hire someone to work for an hour to just send in work for you. There's ways you can make this work, if you really want to.
Yeah, I think one of these days we should do one of these episodes. We should, because I think you're always kind of dropping knowledge that, like, things that I wouldn't really think about, that are kind of scaled down versions, and maybe some, because I think a lot of times you're thinking about that process and you're like hiring somebody. As soon as I'm thinking about hiring somebody, I'm thinking about thousands of dollars. I'm thinking about time, all this other stuff. But yeah, what you just said is like really, that's like kind of connecting. Like, if you have somebody, you're not asking them to create things. You're saying that, hey, for this hour of maybe you're just like $20, you just have to make sure I'm submitted to all these places or whatever. Maybe even it just gets you sleep, you know what I mean? Maybe it just gets you rest. Like, that's incredibly valuable. So like, maybe the only thing that you're paying them the reason why you're paying them to do that is because without them doing that, then you can't sleep, and without sleep, then maybe you're not the best version of yourself, the most creative version of yourself, and that's needed.
Yeah, I mean, you could literally have them being submitted in a contest for you, and you win one contest. Maybe that's enough to cover their fee. You know what I mean? But I think that, again, everything has a cost. So it's like, that's $20. But no, like, I look at my submission fee. It's like, oh, wow, look, I have 20 submissions out. Or like something like that. And I think I am not a CPA. I am not an accountant. These sorts of things for your business, they may be things you can actually write off, by the way. And don't think that you need to have your own business to write things off, because that is not true.
And we cannot stress enough, he is not a CPA.
not a CPA. I cannot give you financial advice.
Not giving you financial. So if next year your tax returns is like $50,000 more than they should be, because you heard
one poetry submission, you hired someone for an hour.
Oh, Jeff just said I could write all this.
But I think a lot of people have that perception that I don't have my own business. I work for an employer. I can't write things off. But there's a good discussion might be finding an accountant, just talking to them for an hour,
dude,
about things.
We should have an accountant on.
I do. I actually want to bring an accountant on at some point.
And then we could also have the count from Sesame Street. It just seems like that guy has a good mind for it. He just understands. He just gets it.
All right. I'm gonna end us.
Two.
I'm gonna end us here on that.
Boy, hold on. Before we go, if everybody's out there, make sure, because I think I don't know. Maybe I have to be better at this too. But what is it? Share, repost, whatever. All the situation. Just make sure.
Tell a friend that we're doing this.
Diverse's Poetry on YouTube. The main reason is because you like what we're talking about, and you like to hear this.
If you're here, like listening to this right now, that's
but also it's just because it really helps the channel and it helps more people kind of have access to some of this information and just us talking. So do that, or else.
But thank you guys for joining me. So again, I'm Jeff.
I'm also Jeff, but you can call me Matthias.
And we'll see you next week on Versus Live. You guys take care.
See ya.